Okay, so I'm here with Dr. Maram. Could you start, Maram, by telling me a bit more about your research and your scientific interests so far?
Yes, so I have a PhD in pharmacology. So my research is very broad, but mostly pharmacology based or with a pharmacology focus. And so before I even started pharmacology, I did my undergraduate as a biochemistry undergraduate. So I did my biochemistry degree. My very first research experience was in medicinal chemistry. And there I worked in a lab of mainly chemists, but they were developing compounds that can be used to treat drug-resistant tuberculosis. That was really cool and really exciting. And so from there, I wanted to go deeper into biochemistry since that was my degree. I did a year of research in a biochemistry lab where we were trying to understand the structure of this channel in our muscle cells called the ryanodine receptor. And this channel exists in our heart muscle and our skeletal muscle. And when there's problems with this channel, if it opens too much or if it closes too much, either way, you get disease. And so we were just trying to understand the structure of that so that we can find drugs to target that, to open it when it closes too much or close it when it opens too much. And while that was really cool and fascinating, I realized that it was a little too structural and a little too much physics for me. Was never really strong in physics, and I never really liked physics. They probably went together, but I didn't love physics that much. And so from there, I pivoted towards pharmacology because I felt like, in a biological sciences sense, it's a lot of the same biology that I was doing in both of those labs, but the focus is more on research that results in it's closer to developing drugs than understanding the structure of a
Yeah,
receptor,
no,
if
that,
that makes sense. So
that makes sense.
yep. So I wanted to kind of like head in that direction a little bit. So I did my PhD in pharmacology. But with that being said, with my interest being more in like being closer towards developing drugs, my research lab was actually a very fundamental biology lab. Like we were just understanding the fundamentals of like what's going on in our body. And so that was a DNA repair lab. So we were interested in understanding how our cells recognize and repair DNA damage. This does ultimately come with a very far goal of using that knowledge to develop drugs to treat cancer, but we're still in the very early stages of like what's even going on in these cells. Before, so it's going to be like many different stages of science happening before you get to the drugs part. But it was very cool and very interesting. I loved the research a lot, and that's how I learned how to be a scientist and how to ask scientific questions. The field was interesting and it was pretty small, so you got to feel like you had a good grip on it because there's not that many people studying the kind of DNA damage that I was interested in. So it was a really great experience, and I love I loved that, and I still
Oh,
love it.
that sounds great. I would say, in terms of, I know, so for those who aren't aware, in terms of the difference between the UK US model of specializing, in terms of with your college experience, then what were the type of classes that you did to get to that first undergraduate degree or that grad school route that you went down the route of?
Yes. I haven't thought about it too much because it's been 10
Ah,
years, but I'll try. So I would say you start out with like the foundational biology classes. That's where you learn just very basics of biology, a little bit of lab work, but it was like plating bacteria on agar plates. That's probably the first time I ever did that. The first time I had ever like seen that, but it was very focused towards people that wanted to be inside in the sciences. But it was also, I don't know if it's like this in the UK, but in a lot of like four-year universities in America, the first few years of classes are just intended to weed out people that thought they wanted to do this but aren't willing to put in the work or the effort, because a lot of people obviously start as pre-med because a lot of people don't know much about the sciences, or a lot of people don't know what they want to do, so they're like, oh, I'll be pre-med because I'm going to be a doctor and make a lot of money. And so they want to weed out as many people as possible. So the very first 2 years, it's these hardcore like chemistry courses and physics courses where like the average grade on a test is like 40-50%, and the teacher has to like grade it or curve it drastically in order for people to pass the class. But like the whole intention for that is to, one, make it look like their classes are hard as university, but two, to weed out people that aren't super interested. So that's the first 2 years that I'm just thinking of, like my first 2 years. Those are the general classes that aren't necessarily biochemistry focused, but they give you the foundation. So it's the calculus, the chemistry, the physics, the biology, and those are the very intense courses that are, like, again, not specifically geared towards your degree. Once I'm in my third year, that's when the courses become a little bit more focused, or help get me closer to the biochemistry degree, I guess. So that's when I start taking genetics, cell biology, biochemistry 1 and 2. I took a biophysics course. I think those were all of the sciences. There's labs that you take as well. Chemistry lab, organic chemistry. So there's the chemistry 1, 2, and then organic chemistry 1, 2, and they each come with their lab. Those again are in the earlier weed out years. That's all the science courses, I think. And then you get the chance to take electives if you want. I was really interested in history, so I took various history courses throughout, because before I decided I wanted to be a scientist, I was actually contemplating being in history world. And so those were kind of the electives that I chose.
So, to just give a bit of a context, so in terms of the UK undergraduate course, really we pick the overarching specialism from the get-go. So our modules are very much geared towards, okay, you've decided you want to do biochemistry or biological sciences. These are all the modules that relate to that. You haven't really got any pivots in that. If you students do have a dropout rate in the first year where they can go and do it, basically apply for a new course, start again from scratch, but there's nothing baked into it to allow them to pivot, especially in the UK and a lot of other European universities. There are some where you have the major minor route, but it's not, I would say, the typical degree setup that we have, that you have over.
So the decision and like your focus, it comes like before you start your first year?
So you graduate, you leave your college, so that's your the 16 to 18-year-olds, they leave with A-levels or a technical diploma, and they've already decided on which particular undergraduate they want to do, and that's normally 2 years taught content, and then a final year, which is a dissertation, so that's their applied research. Then the masters, from my understanding of the US-UK system, masters is pretty similar across both, and then the PhDs are also very similar in terms of, I know a lot of, from speaking to a lot of PhD students from the US, it tends to be more PhD candidate, whereas a lot of UK students go in as PhD student and they start the project 4 years in, but that's just because a lot of the UK model, I suppose, has research built into it. So our research experience is generally already down that niche rather than some of the differences that you might see in the US system, but that's my view of it. But in terms of pharmacology, what really motivated you to pursue the subject itself? So I know not liking physics was possibly one of the pivots, but what was the real motivation for it?
Yeah, so earlier than all of that, I guess I forgot to mention one of the earliest science classes that I took, which was actually an intro course that I took when I was still unsure of my major. I knew, again, like I said, I left high school knowing I like history and I like biology, and I think I want to do one of those two things. And so my first year, I had like a sprinkling of electives in like history courses that weren't required for my degree, and also some science courses. And the science course that I signed up for was called Human Health and Disease. And essentially it was like the first semester they ever had that course. And they basically they broke down the molecular basis for disease. And once you understand the molecular basis for disease, they then explain how we use drugs to target that in order to either treat or cure or help with the symptoms, alleviate symptoms of that condition or disease. And so that was my first time at learning and seeing, like, when you have a cold, when you are having a allergic reaction, when that, what's actually happening at the molecular level, and how are you how do we as humans, how have we developed the technology or the tools to alleviate that or treat that? And that was the most fascinating thing to me. And that's why I decided to go into biochemistry. And that's why I knew I wanted to go deeper into that route of like not only understanding our biology, but developing tools or using our knowledge to then treat the conditions associated with the pathophysiology, I guess. So that was kind of the first thing. And that's kind of what I kept remembering and coming back to, you know, when I say like, but how does this help? Like, how close, like on the spectrum, I guess, of like understanding to fixing, like where is this research on that spectrum? And I wanted to be as close as possible to the actually treating. But it all came from that course where we got to like understand both of those at the same time instantly. Obviously the process is a lot longer and more difficult than that.
And no, I can see the passion there. And just thinking around what you're saying about certain courses pushing you more that way, was there any, I would say, a pivotal individual, a lecturer, a teacher, or whether it's someone outside of academia that really gave you that more social drive, I suppose, rather than the academic?
I would say for that one, it's definitely just the family that I was raised into, / mostly my dad. I come from a very academic family. Both my parents left Egypt and came to America to get their PhDs. Only my dad ended up getting his PhD because my mom ended up taking care of the kids. But they're both, you know, just as passionate about academia and science and understanding. My mom her master's was in nuclear physics. My dad was in computer engineering, but he did physics and he worked with my mom in the Egyptian like nuclear physics place. I don't know what it's called. So I just come from a family that is very focused and interested in learning and understanding in academia world. And they did spend their whole life pushing us in that direction. And I wasn't like resistant to that. I actually enjoyed learning also. And I enjoyed the sciences. And so like, as much as they pushed me, it wasn't that one of those things that your parents push you into something that you don't like. I growing up in that house, I loved and enjoyed it all as well. So I knew I wanted to, I enjoy learning, and I knew I wanted to learn deeply, and I wanted to be like my father, who is so smart and learns so deeply and understands everything at a deep level. And he's also got a lot of work ethic, and he just like set up a standard for me, I guess, that I didn't know that I was following that when I first started this, but now that I'm a little more grown up, I can look back and recognize that was a huge part of the driving factor.
No, I can completely understand that. And like you say, if you have that representation particularly close to home, it can have such a profound impact on you as an individual, and clearly it has done. And I suppose one of the main things in terms of thinking about so whilst not a first generation student, do you think, just thinking broadly, do you think the representation of your parents being so academically inclined really had, if it wasn't for them, you might have done potentially something different? I know that's a really abstract question, but
yeah, I guess I don't know if I'm going to be answering it fully, but I guess I can say that, I had a thought and it fell out of my head right as I was thinking it. Oh, no, where'd it go? I just had it. Sorry. Like, as you were asking it, I knew exactly what I wanted to say. And then as I started talking, it just fell out of my head. I guess, let's take it slowly. Representation. I guess I can say that in terms of, I knew what I wanted to say, is that I was really shocked. And I guess I'm really, really privileged to be able to say this, but I was really shocked going into my PhD program when we started talking about privilege and first generation students and all of that. I was really surprised to know that like some of my peers had never heard of a PhD before, like a year or two before applying for the program. And so that's something that I had taken for granted, because it's something that I had known my whole life, that's what my dad did and that's what my mom wanted to do, but she couldn't. And like I just knew that and I mean, I didn't plan on getting a PhD until like midway through college, I guess, but I always knew that was an option, and I always knew that that's something that I could do, and this is what it's like. And so I can say that was definitely a huge thing that I didn't appreciate enough, or I didn't understand until I saw, like I said, around me, my peers that were like, I didn't know what a PhD was until literally like a few months before I applied for the program. But with that being said, I would say that, in our community, in whatever state we've lived in America, we've been in pretty small Arab American or Muslim American communities. And I can say that like first generation immigrants mostly come to America, some, if they are in the academic track, or, if they want to do academic based studies, or the careers that follow that, usually they go into engineering, pharmacy, dentistry, the very basic. I think it's the trio, right? Pharmacy, dentistry, medicine, or engineering. And so there was definitely no one that I knew in my social life that was a scientist at all. And so, even now that I've graduated, I don't know anyone in my social life, anyone that I've grown up with in any of the states that we've lived in, or anyone that I knew throughout my childhood that became a scientist. And so I would say that part was definitely lacking. And that's part of what I wanted to provide to other Muslim and Arab American girls like me through social media, is to be like, hey, this is an option for you. You can become a scientist potentially if you want. And there are people that look like you that are scientists, because I didn't have that. It didn't stop me or deter me, but it's something that I just knew that there was, if I wanted to talk to anyone from my background about that, there was no one that I could talk to about my world, essentially.
And like you say, that does have a highly profound impact on anyone in terms of their aspirations. And I suppose, fortunately, you've had your parents as that, the role models for yourself. But in terms of just digging into your more cultural heritage, how, do you find anything from, whether it be your parents' backgrounds or yourself, in terms of your parents are both from Egypt? How do you find the connection still between where you are now and your heritage, your culture?
It's something that I have to work very hard. I mean, I love Egypt a lot, and I feel a very deep connection to Egypt that I had since I was little. Through our family would go back and visit maybe every 3 years or so, but I always felt very connected, and I think Egypt's maybe always on my mind. It's never not on my mind. But I will say that my PhD was a huge reason for me not being able to go for a long time. I didn't go for 10 years after I spent my childhood going every 3 years. And 6.5 of those years were during my PhD. Like, there's no way you can just like leave. I mean, you can, but it's harder from America. I don't know. It's different from family to family, but in our family, just to consider going to Egypt, you're paying like a very expensive plane ticket. You're traveling a very far distance. You want to spend a good chunk of time there, at least 3 weeks. And that's not something I can just do in my PhD, just leave for 3 weeks, leave my research and just, go to Egypt. So I didn't go for a while. So I can say that my PhD tried to tear me away from Egypt for a little bit. With that being said, I wish I knew more about the science that's happening in Egypt. I have like occasionally tried to just like browse through LinkedIn and see what kind of institutions there are there. But I don't have anyone that I can talk to that has personal experience, that knows exactly what the science world is like. Like I said, my mom did science, but she was in physics and nuclear physics, and her work was very physics based. But like the biological sciences world, not a single person in my family is in that world, so I don't even know who to start to ask to understand.
Yeah, and otherwise you're back at the cold emailing type approach on LinkedIn and so on, which is a different beast in itself. But yes. I suppose my next thought is, outside of family and so on, do you have any, when you think of scientists, do you have any pivotal scientists who you really think, oh yeah, that's who inspired me? I was inspired to find out more about that field because of that individual, or did you not have that type of inspiration?
I didn't really have that, no. Yeah. I don't know if it's a very lame answer, but
I think half of it is, when we think of various different scientists, most people can refer to the very westernized perspectives of historic scientists that we tend to see, the Einsteins, the Darwins, Marie Curie. those type of people who have had a pivotal impact, but they seem to be the token people who are wheeled out every time when people think of academic or scientific role models. When going into my own PhD, I could not say a single person who within my field that stuck out to me as an inspirational scientist. And so it's definitely not a lame answer at all.
Yeah. Okay, good. I'm glad. Yeah, I definitely didn't have that, and I didn't even have, because I know like when we were first applying for our PhD programs, another thing that I felt like kind of like the weirdo out of the group was everyone knew exactly what kind of research they wanted to do. I want to do breast cancer. I want to do brain cancer. I want to do Alzheimer's, and I didn't have that either. I just wanted to learn more science, and so yeah, I think I feel like those two kind of go together. It's just I'm like interested in science and interested in learning, but there wasn't these key things that I was like being pulled towards. It was just very broadly I wanted to learn.
I mean, in of itself, finding something that really motivates you, if the science itself can be the motivating side or the journey through learning in itself, if that's what motivates, then that's what motivates. And I think that would probably be very much the case for a lot of other individuals who I've spoken to, either in my own research or in various different conversations, where people just come to it through all different angles. And I think the problem is getting universities to recognise that most people do come from that perspective. They don't come from I know exactly what I want to do. I want to be a lawyer. I want to do all that, you do have those examples, but yeah, there is more diversity in the motivation from what I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the people that I don't think you guys do rotations in the UK, but we do so when you join the PhD program, you spend your first 2 years or year and a half. For us, it's a year and a half doing your coursework. And during that time, you do rotations in several different labs to decide on the lab that you're going to end up doing your dissertation research in. And so you have labs in mind maybe that you want to rotate in, but it depends on, does that professor have capacity to take on a PhD student? Do they have the bandwidth? Do they have the funds to fund your research? And then also, are you guys compatible, which is what you kind of find out during your rotation. And so for me, like all those people that went in, like, I want to study this kind of breast cancer. And it's like, how can you guarantee, like, I feel like you're just setting yourself up for disappointment, because that whole rotation system, I feel like it's mostly luck, honestly, which lab you end up in. Like you can decide I must end up in this lab, but then also the advisor has to accept you. So how can you, like, I feel like it's a little too, you're setting yourself up to be disappointed early on in your PhD.
And I suppose, I know, so it is a very different system we have here. So generally speaking, what students tend to do here is you can either apply directly to the advisor, directly to that academic who you want to work with, and you give them a research proposal and you can self-fund. So we have doctoral loans here, so you can apply for a loan similar to a standard tuition fee loan, and that becomes a lot of your funding. You can also apply for various grants and awards, but the downside of that is, one, not many people know how to access them before you're in program to know that they exist, and they're also competitive in themselves. Other than that, you tend to have, rather than the academic leading it, generally they go out to advert for various different potential PhD projects that are funded, and the student applies as if they were applying for a job or a course, give a cover letter, it's very similar to a job application, so it feels very formal initially. You normally have to call your PhD advisor, who will be a PhD advisor, to ask them various different questions, so like a pre-interview. Then the interview process, then generally you go straight into your PhD program and you hit the ground running from a research perspective. The first day you land, you don't have the rotational side. The closest to that we have is we do have masters in research, where an individual will do their masters in some form of research program, and then they might pique the interest of the supervisor, who will then become their PhD supervisor. That happens. but it's far smaller
Okay.
in the UK system and similar in Europe, by my understanding.
Okay, interesting. That's very
But
interesting.
yeah, so I suppose this takes me on to more thinking about the impact of your research. So obviously pharmacology, drug development, and understanding drugs and medicine in general. What do you feel like the impact of your research personally is going to be in that type of area?
If anything, generating the knowledge that's required for the next person to develop the drugs to help save lives. um, if all fails, and if I'm never able to, directly contribute to the development of a particular life-saving drug, I know that the work that I'm doing is setting up the stage for that, and that every bit of knowledge that we gain is going to, I mean, I'm sure there is some knowledge there is much knowledge that's been generated that hasn't been used, but we want to have as broad and as deep of an understanding of our biology as possible. And if anything, the things that I'm learning are setting up for that in the future.
There's more of the mechanism that can potentially feed into a broader method and potential broader applications. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
I suppose thinking of the other side of research impact, how it prepares you as a scientist and how it prepares you as a communicator. Why did you get into more content education and being a scientist who's communicating and researching academia on social media?
Yes. On one hand, I love talking and I love explaining things, so that something that's always been in me, and I guess you can't really do content creating if you don't love talking and talking and talking. That's just one small, just characteristic of mine, I guess. But the thing that happened that led me to make my social media channel, it was really during the COVID pandemic, and in those first few months. And like I said, in my community, not very many scientists. There's doctors and there's pharmacists, but there aren't very many scientists. And so people that I knew or that I didn't even know very well would come up to me asking me questions about the virus and asking me questions about the vaccines. And they were those very, the dominant narrative or the first things that get to the people are the misinformation, not the actual information. So people were usually coming to me with misinformation and asking me to tell them, is this true? Is there any basis behind this? Why not? They just wanted to understand from me. And I knew while I was in these conversations, I knew that I was probably the only person in their life that they can talk to back and forth about this. And so I wanted to be available as a resource to more people, so that you don't have to necessarily talk to me face to face, to be someone that I look like you and I share the same background, share the same religion, maybe just share the same age and generation, and I am able to talk about these topics that everyone's concerned about, everyone's curious, everyone's hearing misinformation, no one knows what to believe. And I knew that I also had I was very privileged in having the scientific background, because I can't imagine being bombarded with all that misinformation without the scientific background. So I wanted to do whatever I could to try and help with that. And obviously the easiest way to do that was online. So my channel actually started just talking about vaccines, just explaining how a vaccine works, what's RNA. That's really how I started initially. Of course, over time that changed, but that's what got me onto TikTok and what got me into science communication world to start out with.
And like you say, you highlight the point about misinformation, and one thing I'm well aware of when being privileged in the field that I'm researching, that it isn't overly controversial. As a result, a lot of things I can share tend to be, oh yeah, I've never thought about it that way, and you get more of a general positive attitude, whereas those like yourself who are working in health or those who are working in climate research tend to bear the brunt of what I would say the anti-science brigade in a lot of cases, or in many more cases just people who are trying to present an alternative argument, and a potentially very harmful and damaging argument. So I know that's something that you've spent a lot of time in, and just wondering if you could share your thoughts on misinformation generally, and then potentially we'll go into something that's a follow-up after that.
Yeah. Misinformation in general, I mean, you've seen my videos, so I feel very strongly. It's very, very upsetting, and I know there's many different causes behind it, and there's many different causes for why people fall for it. And again, that's part of what I wanted to do on social media, because I guess going back to before the misinformation world that we're in today in 2024, I know there's misinformation has many, many different shapes and forms, but it all started. I mean, we were seeing it before social media was what it is today, when maybe we were only on Instagram and Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And I know something that I heard a lot throughout my PhD, whenever someone knew I was doing a PhD, would be like, "Oh, is it true that the cure for cancer exists, but the government's hiding it so that they can make money off of people dying from cancer, or people paying for drugs that don't work, essentially?" And so that's something that I also just as I was progressing through my PhD, I knew that no one really knows, because once you have an understanding of how research works and how science works and what the day-to-day life of a scientist is, you don't even that thought won't even cross your mind, or won't even you're going to brush it off as soon as it comes to mind. But it's able to sink so deeply with people because they don't really know what scientists do, really. They just have an image of mad scientists just pouring colorful liquids from one beaker to the next. And so that's just to say that a lot of this misinformation, there's people at the top, there's people that are the source for all of this information, but the general public, the people that take in this information are this is the information they were given, and scientists, I don't think, are doing a good enough job of telling people, well, this is actually what it is. And so that's part of it's I don't even know if I'm going to talk in a very straightforward way, because I feel like there's just so many different aspects of it. There's the people that are doing it obviously to make money. There's the people that are they capitalize off of the fact that there's many health conditions and maybe even diseases that don't really have a cure, but that affect people pretty significantly, or even moderately, but they just affect people's day-to-day lives, and they're sick of not having an answer. We also don't have a wonderful health system. There's so many flaws with our health system, so they capitalize off of the the vulnerability that people feel about their health in order to make money off of them and feeding them information. And the most frustrating thing I think about misinformation recently has been that there was a time where misinformation was these certain types of scientific misinformation were mostly just the people that believed these things were kind of like a niche type of person that was maybe into wellness or into these types of health, like alternative medicine, someone that sought out that information and was kind of deep into that. I feel like now this information has been so widespread that almost anyone you encounter believes it at some level.
No,
if that makes sense. Even yeah. And that's just the most
like you say, the rise of the homeopathic treatments and so on, especially with homeopathic products. And I will say, to provide a bit of context for people who are in the UK who might not have seen the US advertising system in terms of drugs, and like when I've had the privilege of going on holiday to the States and seeing, you just flick on the television and you see adverts for diabetes commercials or heart medicine or whatever, and you think, okay, one protection we have here is only the supplements that would potentially be what would be argued as the homeopathic kind would be on TV. All our other medicine and so on is very, very much, if you go to the doctors, that is where you are introduced to this particular medicine. Otherwise, you are never going to hear about it. I think the closest I can think of that someone might come across is maybe the likes of the hay fever and allergy over-the-counter stuff that becomes more, or the cold and flu medicine. They're the closest adverts we get, but certainly nothing dramatic, which I've always found fascinating by the fact that the US advertising market allows that. But
yeah.
I know one of the problems, and I think you've experienced it as well as seeing it in terms of with social media, is the fact that there's a lot of inbuilt bias in social media companies in terms of wanting to perpetuate these various supplements and so on, because they can find a niche, they can find a market for it, they can expand that market for it very easily. And when scientists like yourself try to speak against it and go against that grain, we have the reverse effect. We have a more of a post-truth side where it's like, well, no, that's going to be classed as misinformation or flagged for spam or whatever. And the people who are selling the medication and so on, which is not likely to work because it's either popular or because it makes profit. No, we'll push that, but we'll knock you down. And
yeah, that's the thing is like if I were, because I made a video before comparing my prescription medication that I take for my thyroid versus like the vitamin D that I take for my vitamin D deficiency. And it's like if I were to make a video about my thyroid medicine, the information that I would be, drawing from would be peer-reviewed published studies. The vitamin D, there is quite a bit of peer-reviewed studies on it. So I guess it's not the perfect example, but let's say it was like, I think they're talking about lion's mane mushroom supplement. I think if I were to be talking about that, there isn't that much research on it. So what I'm going to be talking about is either things that I make up or just like things that I experienced and sharing them as fact. So just like inherently, like you just can't provide that level of information about these, homeopathic remedies and this alternative world like you can about FDA approved medications, for example. But I'm not going to make money, and I can't. It would probably be illegal. I'm assuming it's illegal for me to sell my thyroid medication on TikTok Shop. And so it's kind of like pushing. It's just the natural result. Maybe it's like a lot of people are intentionally doing this, knowing that they're hurting people, but it's also like it's the way that it's set up. That's what was going to happen anyways, I guess, as long as they allowed the selling of supplements and things like that on TikTok.
Yeah, and I think equally the fact that social media allows you to put doctor in front of your title quite easy. Most of the scientists I've met on social media, like yourself or various other individuals, don't tend to put doctor in front of their name, whereas most of the people who have doctor in front of their name are selling something, a supplement, a protein powder, or whatever. Magnesium spray, I think, is the one that I see the most of that you've spoken about, and various of it. And I mean, don't get me wrong, I would have a lot more time for them if they said that it might help in some ways, it might have a placebo effect, and talked more honestly. Like, as someone who's had acupuncture, I have no basis in knowing that has actually helped, but it generally makes me feel better, and I enjoy it for that reason. But would I go and say, okay, this is the medication you've been prescribed, go and have acupuncture instead? No. If you want to have the medication and see if that works, and you think acupuncture might have a benefit, then sure, crack on with both. But recognize that it may just have a placebo effect that you perceive is going to have a positive impact on you. I mean, I generally will say it's had more of a benefit in terms of like sports injuries and so on, but I've also had done the typical rest it afterwards, ice, heat, that type of thing, which is plentiful research that says that, or the various different ibuprofens and so on, which most people will take for it. But yeah,
and that's the thing is like I feel like that's like something that you want the viewer to have that understanding, but most viewers unfortunately don't. And then with this world, it's okay, because I'm just like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about like the different types of things that people advertise. And for example, there's like perfume talk, for example, right, where people buy. I mean, a lot of my friends are on perfume talk where they see someone talking about this perfume and that perfume and this perfume and that perfume. And if I have a bottle of perfume and I'm talking to you about it, all I can tell you about is my personal experience with it. And if that's what people did with supplements, that would be just fine. Like, it wouldn't be ideal still. It wouldn't be the greatest thing, because you would still want to have that nuance and placebo, and like, like you're saying, there's certain things that you want to say as well. But still, even if they had just kept it as I did this and it was great for me, that would be fine. But the thing is, once you have a health supplement, the next thing they do automatically is be like, and studies have shown, insert misinformation, and they just like start like, they just never keep it at just my personal experience. They have to say it's been shown, someone's lying to you, it's been hidden. Like, they just dive right into that. And like, it happens just, I don't think I've seen it with any other things being sold online as much as I see it with these these supplements and homeopathic remedies.
And like you say, I think the other side of that is it's potentially the approach if you took it more from, let's say, fitness and well-being, and these supplements were, or like for me, acupuncture sits into more of the spa remedy type thing. So it's a well-being practice for me. And as a result, when you think about it from that perspective, on the well-being side, on the fitness side, it's not necessarily anywhere near as problematic. Second, you break into health, then one, people tend to take an assumption of that what you're saying, especially if you have doctor in front of your name, and it's the false side of people thinking that's an expert giving me advice. And it would be quite interesting if social media companies ever said, well, if an individual is preaching this, then they were going to have a certain amount of accountability, and they can be held accountable for giving effectively same as people giving financial advice. I mean, on the same respect of that, in the financial side, there are a million and one, same as there are in the health side. There's a million and one people giving financial advice, which I know has occasionally popped into my comments saying, "Oh, use X for financial advice," and you're thinking, "Yeah, probably a crypto, whatever." And I think if social media brought some of the regulations into the creators, I think it'd be an interesting way of them potentially policing it. But whether or not they ever will, and whether or not, I know we're both on TikTok and various also on Instagram. I don't think it's all a TikTok problem or all an Instagram problem. I think it's social media across the board has this problem. I mean, LinkedIn evidences robot workers who are literally AI generated over a person to make it look like the robot is in the field, and it's really someone actually working in the field. So all social media companies have the same problems, but I think until there's someone who holds people accountable for it, then I don't think we're going to potentially get to that and any form of accountability or solution for social media. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges then, with misinformation being what it is, and potentially most people referring to us as being in the post-expert or post-truth age? What do you think is the biggest challenge for content educators on social media?
Very broadly, it's just getting your video on the algorithm or just getting your video fed onto people's feeds. Because I can try and I don't know, for example, so you need to try different methods of communication and get a response from people and see what worked and what didn't work, and use what you've gathered from this experience to make a better video next time, or to communicate in a different way or a better way next time. But if no one's even seeing my videos, I don't even know how the broad public will perceive my videos. That's very hard. There's just it's really hard. It feels like you're trying so hard to speak into the void. You're speaking into the void essentially, and it's just I do have a nice group of my small group of people, you included, that see my content and interact with my content. But in terms of I feel like the people that do interact with my content are people that believe me already. But if I'm trying to make a dent into the wider world, it's just my videos aren't getting anywhere. And that's partially the algorithm or the way the app is, and partially I think also the fact that science, it's not that exciting for many people, and not many people will want to watch more than 3 seconds of a science video. But that's why you would want support from the algorithm or help from the algorithm to push it into the pages of people who do need to see this information, rather than just being oh, this is not interesting to anyone, we're gonna end your views for now.
Yeah, and like you say, I think this is potentially one of the areas where, for me, I think the hope with long form content and with YouTube, where a lot of scientists I know, like you say, within that academic community on various different apps, have also branched into the likes of YouTube to be more long form applicable. And I know we've got a few shared connections who are doing various different lives to try to explain what, and that seems to be something that's pushed. But I think for me, one of the challenges I know from speaking to a lot of scientists who are not on social media who have said that's something I'm never going to do is, and I mean, there is a perception that social media, what people say on the computer or on their phones is vastly different than what they would say to you in person. But I know that puts a lot of people off. I've had some experience of trolling. I'm sure you have as well. And it's, I think, I'm not sure if you share my view, but I look at it from, if my purpose is to educate, share the work and that type of thing, if you do not want to see my content, then either go elsewhere. And if you need a hand doing that, then I will remove you from seeing the content so that you don't need to interact with it, because my purpose is not to scale and make a massive amount of money from it. That's not my purpose with generating it. And if you take that more of that approach, and okay, people who want to see it are either people who I'm trying to reach who may want to engage with it. The people who are so far away from this idea, who are never going to interact with it in a either critical or a positive way, then if they're so far away from it, the benefit of them seeing the information and the benefit of me trying to reach them is largely not going to do anything, and it's just going to perpetuate an argument, and then they can go. And that's my approach to it. And I know some people have a similar approach as I do. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on.
I mean, I definitely agree, and I definitely fall into that. But then I also have like another side of me that's like, but these are the people that do need to hear this, because the people that are coming off as not needing to hear it are actually the ones that do need to hear this information. Obviously, like, I can't control or I can't affect whether or not they're going to actually open their minds to it or be willing to accept it. But that's kind of like, it's a battle, I guess is what I want to say. It's a battle inside of me. Like, do these people just get blocked, or do I try and engage? But if they're not engaging in good faith, there's no point in engaging at all. But like, I'm always being tugged at when I get a comment like that, where like their comment is so steeped in like, I can see exactly where the problem is, and I want to like talk to you, and like, you know, I want to get to the bottom of this with you. But again, if that person's not willing, and most people on social media are not willing, they're just willing to argue and troll and, you know, and just be mean, essentially. So it's really hard. These conversations are usually better had in real life, and like I was telling you earlier, I started this in real life. And I wanted to continue it on social media, but yeah, it's not the same on social media as it is in real life, because it comes with that.
I think one of the things you hit on there was the whole good faith exchange. Like, I've had him within my comments and within different exchanges on other people's videos, where you have, if they are willing to move a little from their position and they're being critical, I think, like you say, that type of commenter, they have every right to engage with it. They might be engaging at it from a completely different view, but it's a positive interaction. Whereas you have some people who just pop up, say something completely against it. They have no intention of doing anything other than arguing, and it's those individuals that are there. And the other ones, I suppose, are the ones who pop up saying with basically an advert for something else. Essay writing is virtually on every science communicator I've seen. An essay writer pops up on all of their comments to say, I'll write your essays for you. Those are also not overly helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. There's actually a comment that I was just thinking about yesterday. I got it a few weeks ago, but it's just, you know, like, it's one of those things that you just wish you could just talk to the person face to face. Where I think it is a video that I had made, misinformation video that I was correcting. And then someone was like, commenting what you're saying. A lot of people were telling me just semantics, even though I was correcting false information to true information. But to them, it's just like, you're focusing on the wrong details. The big picture is these people are bad, that's what they were trying to tell me. But then one person is like, what this man is saying, the misinformation guy, is well known and well understood in the anti-pharma community. And like, my response to that is, what's well known and well understood in the anti-pharma community is misinformation. That's why I'm trying to work on this misinformation. That's why I'm trying to tell you the true information. But that, like, it's so hard to have these conversations, because he'll tell you that, and then that by telling you that, he's not trying to have a conversation. He's just telling you that and then disregarding anything you say after that. And that's just, for me, it's really hard. It's some people deal with it better than me, but I really, really struggle with it.
I think I do think you deal with it really well. And I think for me, my only thing that's similar to that is when my background before doing more of the social science research was in like biosecurity and agriculture. And I've had exchanges where I can understand, for example, like washing chicken. It's a cultural thing for some people. And it's not disregarding that. It's trying to say to most people, the conventional wisdom is this, the reason why you don't do this. But that's not to say the practices that you have from a food hygiene point of view may well be still meeting the same standards as what. But the experts will never be able to tell you, oh yeah, go and wash your chicken, because most people will not necessarily follow the same practices that you do. And because they don't follow the same practices, they are likely to get food poisoning and potentially die from said food poisoning. It's the other thing that a lot of the comments sections don't help with is trying to have that conversation when you're limited to something like the equivalent of 80 words, and is in itself a huge challenge. But I do think when I've engaged with people who've been particularly challenging before, if they have that, not necessarily they're willing to move from their position, but they're willing to understand your perspective, and therefore they feel like you've understood theirs, I feel that is a win in of itself. They're not saying that you're agreeing with them. You're just saying, look, I understand your perspective. I understand your point of view. The prevailing wisdom might disagree with you, but that does not say that, even though it's not to discredit necessarily all of your positions. Now, I mean, in some arguments, there's only your only alternative is to discredit their opinion. But in some cases, like my own experience with like food hygiene and biosecurity, there are cases where one practice is fine and the other practice is also fine. The other practice is safer, but whether doesn't mean that the other practice in itself isn't safe. It's more like without going into health and safety and risk, which will, for anyone who listens to this, it's more that type of conversation. But
no, I thought the chicken videos were very interesting because I struggle a lot with chicken in the house because it scares me, and I was always like tending towards washing it, but like I never felt like washing it. This is a tangent, but I just I know we talk about splatter. I think when people talk about washing chicken, they talk about splatter, and so I just had these two fears in me, like, do I want to wash it and clean it, or do I want to splatter the whole rest of my sink? And so I just essentially two fears inside of me: am I gonna get sick because I'm not washing the chicken, / am I going to get sick because I'm contaminating the other surfaces in my kitchen? So I think your videos actually helped me with that. Is like, if the safety guideline is that like is not to wash, that must mean that I'm not that. I mean, it makes sense. I just hadn't thought of it like that. It's just that the heat is enough to kill the bacteria that we're consuming.
Like you say, the washing it. I mean, basically in the West, the US, UK, a lot of Europe, it goes through a pre-wash anyway, and so largely it's safer in that respect. The main issue with a lot of people it's not when they wash it well, it's the fact that there will be a risk to washing it in a way that generates that cross-contamination. It's the cross-contamination that's really the risk. But yeah, to anyone who does, the conventional wisdom is not to wash chicken and to just cook it on a high heat till it's completely cooked through. But so in terms of thinking, you've already touched on a lot of these points anyway, but I'm more thinking about the impact on the next generation, particularly the lay audience, either someone who you might inspire or someone who connects with you on this level. What would you say what is the impact of content educators on the next generation and the public? Or what should it be?
If anything, it should be pushing for, how do I say this? Should be a reminder and providing resources, I guess, to push people towards looking for credible sources. I think maybe like driving home that you can't believe, even if that means not believing me, that's fine. I just want you to know that most people on this app, most people on these social media apps in general, are sending a particular message that they're interested in sharing for their own reasons. So know to like maybe take what you want, but not take what you want. Use what you see on social media to drive your search and to drive and point you in the direction of reading and looking for accurate sources. Again, like I said, even if it means never believing me, that's fine. But if just, I don't know how to, I'm not being very eloquent with this. Okay, so I just want people to use social media to take it at very surface level, and to, if you're going to be using social media to learn about health content or, make health-based decisions, don't use the words of someone that they're saying on their social media platform to make decisions in your own life. Maybe use them as a jumping off point to then go into the research, go look for credible sources off of social media and learn and understand on your own. And maybe if you want to develop a connection with a content creator and be able to talk to them and ask them questions, but just to have that understanding that like this isn't the place for the information, this isn't the place for true information. And I think that's also part of why I like to like point out that this person says they're a doctor but they're lying, just because when you're scrolling and you're not thinking twice about who's giving you this information, you're not going to have the time to actually like wonder where what's this person's background and training, and where are they getting this information from, and what are these studies that they're talking about, are they actually good? Like none of that happens. And so if anything, just to point people in that direction, because you really shouldn't be telling people what to think or what to believe, but just providing people with the resources that they can use to then find and seek out that information on their own, which is going to be harder in the future in a world where people's reading and comprehension skills are getting worse and worse. And so I don't know what that was going to look like in a few years, but it's the hope.
No, I know what you're saying. I personally, as someone who's interested in education research, I'm of the view, especially as we move towards more information on tap, that we need to go to more understanding focus, critical thinking focus in terms of teaching, education, and so on. But I think the other thing is people need to be realistic in what you can get from quick information. A 3-minute video on TikTok or Instagram in terms of a reel might give you, like you say, a very surface level overview of a topic, a summary, whereas journal article has probably taken a year to write. A thesis has taken 4 or 5 years to write. A book maybe 6 or 7, and you need to recognize the amount of time that they take to generate. And I don't feel like there's no appreciation of that. And now, yes, that will sound a bit preachy in terms of, oh yeah, buy this, buy that, because it's taken X amount of work. It's not saying to do it for that reason. It's just appreciate the level of subject depth that should be there. And equally, I think one of the other responsibilities we have, and I'm not sure if you'll agree, but is I think one of the things with expertise is being prepared to show where you get it wrong. We're at the early stage of our careers, so hopefully we have not yet made anything that we see we need to retract or need to go over that point again. But potentially in 20, 30 years of research, what is the going thought that we have now might be proven to be incorrect at one point, or not necessarily incorrect, but as science has moved on, so therefore that information needs to be updated. And I think that is a thing that I think as experts, particularly any expert that you see on television, and most people think that shows a weakness, and I think it's more of a strength that needs to be championed.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely something that I know it doesn't help us at all as scientists online, is that And I've heard this sentiment so many times is first they told us eggs were good for you, then they told us good eggs are bad for you, then they told us eggs are good for you. And like to them, that must mean that the scientists don't know what they're talking about. Or same with, I don't know, margarine and butter and oils and all of that. And it's like, I can see why that would frustrate you and kind of make you feel like there's no point in listening to any of them. But that's where scientists need to do a better job of explaining to people that this is why we thought this before, and this is why we think this now. And there's nothing that we know for certain. And like what I'm telling you now is maybe the conclusion of either a conclusion of the field or the final a conclusion of the underlying research that we have right now, or my understanding of that, right? But that could change once we add one more study, two more studies, five more studies. My understanding has to change. It may change, or potentially it has to change. And that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It means I'm not like sticking to what I believe. I'm sticking to what the data is saying. And based on how you do the experiment, the data can say different things. And it's up to us as scientists to try and make sense of that and understand that and explain it. But it's very complicated. Like I said, like you said, for science or information on tap, like no one wants to hear all of that. They just want to tell you this is good for you and this is bad.
Like you say, I think before I move into more what do you think is a responsibility of social media companies, I think one of our responsibility is to be that voice to highlight that. And particularly, I know I have a great deal of frustration with print journalism because they tend to present part of a paper that is, this is a groundbreaking piece of information. Yes, it is, but it's also probably had 15 different iterations before it's got to that. And it's presented as this cutting-edge research that has come from nowhere. And it's not, this has been proven because that's been disproven, or that's been proven to be less effective, and so on. If you do not provide the reader with more context to it, then like you say, you get to the point where eggs are good, eggs are bad, because it seems like we flip-flop, and there's more of a curve to it where we view different things. And in a lot of cases, the real nuance in that information, that is the point being made, is completely absent from that from the print journal or print article. Instead, it's very, in my view, unfortunately, it's the caliber of journal. Calibers of journals and the caliber of papers in some cases are also declining to try to keep up with the rapid onset of trying to give information on tap. And not necessarily as much with journals, but definitely newspapers. It's more clickbait. This 10 ways to stave off hair loss and those type of things are the guaranteed ones that people click on, whereas this is a way to this study has found that X lives longer, will catch more people's attention than new discovery made on new creature in the Amazon. Those eye-catching headlines are more interesting than, let's say, new theory is explored in terms of how people learn using tablet computers, or it's not as sexy science as I think what newspapers are trying to sell to their audience. And that's the other thing of recognizing that they are trying to sell it, whereas if it's having to be sold, it's a challenge to try and get.
What you're saying has me thinking of kind of like when we were younger in school, because it's something I think about a lot. I don't remember exactly what we learned in school, but I know that we talked about, once we got to the page of writing our own like research papers, we were writing our 5-page and 10-page papers, and we're calling them research papers. We talked about, credible sources and what are primary sources and secondary sources. And we learned about sources in terms of finding information on the internet, but we never did that in a scientific, like in a science perspective. Like, we learned about, like, if you're going to learn about, World War II, what's considered a primary source, secondary source, like where can you go for information about history? But no one ever taught us where you should go for scientific information. Like, I didn't know what PubMed was until I was in college. Most people don't know what PubMed is. Like, that was never taught to us ever. And so that's just something that came to mind. I never made that connection.
I think it's fair. And I think thinking from how students use Google as a search, or other search engines that they want to use, it tends to be they go to the first couple, and I can tell from when I've had marking experience of I can recognize they've used the first couple because all of my marking, the first reference that I have is those first two websites all the time without fail. But it's you have that, and like you say, a lot of it's surface level information grabbing. It's to evidence recall and to evidence knowledge rather than to rationalize understanding and to show that that different perspective. And I think even with history, and I think particularly without going off into a tangent, one thing that history's shown is whilst we have the primary sources of information, we are being presented with new primary sources of information, which are from different individuals, different accounts of the same experience, but from a different perspective. And for history, that is completely changing the ball game for historians, because it's not discrediting what history was presented as, it's just presenting a new account or a new perspective. And I think for science, I know if we go back, not that anyone ever references generally as far back as the 30s, the 20s and so on, but when various different research papers were sponsored by big tobacco and so on, you have to take into account, whilst those papers might have been discredited, have they fed into any other research as primary literature, which quite likely will be the case, and that lineage of those research papers still live on, even if they don't. And you're only going to find that out from really diving into that literature, which most scientists aren't necessarily always going to do, never mind students who are anywhere between the university age or even younger trying to learn about that. Just recognizing to be critical in what they're telling it. And I think that skill is hard to teach, and it's even harder to communicate to people who are just picking up our videos potentially for 3 seconds and then swiping by.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I suppose, what do you think is the responsibility then for social media companies? Where does the buck land with them? So what, rather than they educate the creator, where does it land with the company?
On one hand, I mean, the very first thing that comes to mind is ban the selling of health supplements online. Like that should not be, I shouldn't be buying my vitamins off a TikTok shop or whatever, my teas. I shouldn't be buying any food consumption products off of TikTok shop. That's one very easy to tackle thing, right? Because if we're going to talk about like vetting people, as we were talking earlier, that's something that's going to take a lot of effort. Who knows if they, I mean, my account was hacked a week ago and I'm not able to talk to anyone. So who knows how they would even like start to tackle vetting people. But not allowing the selling of food and health supplements, that I feel like that's a very easy thing to do. And then I guess the next thing that would be harder to do, and maybe it's a little more idealistic, is to maybe have teams of people. I mean, maybe this wouldn't be the best, because if they pick a team of like scientists to, because how are they deciding misinformation? I think they're using AI to determine if something is misinformation, right? So if they had real experts, well, that's still going to be affected. I mean, the decisions that are made are still going to be affected by the bias of these people and what kind of people they're choosing, right? So it's not going to be very straightforward, but maybe one step forward is better than no steps at all.
Yeah, and like you say, I think one of the problems with the AI-based systems is when you report for whatever misinformation, spam, or let's say even in an argument's sake, harassment, as I've seen reported and still hasn't come up for whatever reason. Main things with that comes to mind is the system is based around whatever the designer, the human side of it, is telling them to promote. If it's, for argument's sake, take TikTok shop, promote the shop, sustain that. If that's the overarching drive of the algorithm, then the AI is never going to flag whatever post up. And as I'm sure you've had this experience, if you've had a post that's been flagged, or I've had a post that's been flagged, and it gets taken down for whatever reason, when it gets, you go against it and it unhides it, it's already killed it anyway, because it won't ever reach anyone further than that. By just allowing people to find it, then it doesn't get re-promoted. It doesn't get like a reverse of a shadow ban, so a light promote maybe. It doesn't get that type of effect. And I do think social media companies have always been hesitant of acting as publishers, but I think if they were acting in a way to say, look, we're going to allow, let's say the argument normally is, we'll allow free speech on the platforms, but if it gets flagged, and we will ensure that we will liaise with various different police forces to allow them to take that person and hold them accountable for what they've said on that. That in itself would be an okay solution in my view. Yes, the misinformation might be out there. You get the human side that you were saying, to sit in front of the room, and it might take longer, but then you might actually deal with the reporting side. And then when it's reported to the police or to whichever government or so on, then it can be highlighted in that way. I do understand there will be problems in various different countries in terms of what is viewed as acceptable speech in various different countries, and I do think that needs to be taken into account. But I think potentially, like with the potential ban of TikTok in the US, I do think a lot of the concern around banning it is stemming from the US hasn't got direct control over it like it has with LinkedIn, Meta, and so on. And I think it's more of a fear side for wanting to have a monopoly on those technologies. That's my outside perspective anyway, because I see a lot of the same problem that's on TikTok, on Instagram, and I see a lot of the same problem on LinkedIn as I do on both of them. Maybe not the supplements. The supplements, I will say that TikTok is its own beast in that one.
Yeah. And I guess like going off of that, like thinking of like internationally and what the internet looks like internationally is, I don't know, like maybe again, it's way too idealistic, but I feel like, you know, everyone wants to go viral, and like, you know, the goal for so many people is to get millions of views. That's the sign that your video did great, right? But maybe we don't need our video to reach millions of people. Like maybe I don't need people in random countries across the world seeing my video. I need people in my community around me seeing my video and hearing me and understanding me. And so like, I don't know if this is even possible in internet world or technology world, but like there's no reason for videos to get millions and millions of views, because who are those, like when you see a video with 10 million views, I always think like, who are these people? Like it's crazy. And it's just like, you don't need that many people to see the video. Like if they were to keep videos more contained, that's fine, but just let them reach the right people. I don't even know how that would work or how it would look, but it's something that pops into my mind every now and then, is like, I don't need to go viral. No one needs to go viral. No one needs 100 million people seeing their video. Like that shouldn't even be a thing. But like videos should be seen and information should be spread. Like we should have the ability to spread information. But like just the way that it is right now, it's just set up for, I guess the way it's happening right now is because that's how it's set up to happen. And it's just, it feeds into, they both feed into.
And like you say, I think part of the problem is the idea of trying to go viral, the desire to try to go in that type of direction. I think one thing we're probably largely safe with the scientific field is, generally speaking, science won't go, it doesn't reach anywhere near that amount. And I mean, like you say, I think the search feature would be the area to focus on with. Like, I think YouTube's probably got the better search from what I've seen. If I've been looking for how-to videos on YouTube are probably the place I go to. Whereas if I do the same thing on TikTok or on Instagram, I will get a variety of different videos that it thinks are how-to. So if it's how to build a cabinet, it will present me with various different cabinets on TikTok in terms of those that are available. And it will present, with Instagram, it might present various different construction reels that people are messing around and that type of thing. So I think there are ways that they potentially could do it, but I think they need to recognize that would be a more positive solution, but I don't necessarily, as a cynic on that side of thing, I think the negative makes them more money. And that's
absolutely.
Yeah, like you say, the idealistic view, I completely would love to see a social media platform like that. I think they had one in something like 2018, which was all around good news, and it disappeared very quickly because people. I think there was a logic that someone said, "Well, people like to be depressed. We like to see things that make us uncomfortable and sad and thinking." I'm thinking that surely can't be a thing. But that was the caption that was the review from it, and I thought, oh, okay. I didn't even know it was a thing, though. To be fair, but outside of that, moving back more to the academic side, just wanted to share with you and get some of your thoughts on your academic heritage. So, from your PhD supervisor and your PhD supervisor's supervisor. So your supervisor is Dr. Campbell at University of Minnesota, but what his work I found largely looked at was so it's largely building on how cells manage and transport material, but Richard Fine, who is your supervisor's supervisor, largely looked at cellular transport and viral interactions. And that was largely looking at, I suppose, where your work has looked at more like DNA and repair of cells. So that's both of Professor Fine and Dr. Campbell's work has largely looked at drug resistance, particularly around cancer therapy. But that's, I suppose, more of your academic heritage, particularly, and I'm sure you can tell me more about what the ins and outs of that is, but it's largely seems to be around cellular repair processes and around cancer therapy. But I'd love to know your general thoughts around that.
Yeah, so I guess if I were to sum up kind of just his mantra, like how he sees science and oh, I had an answer. Again, they keep falling out of my head. Like while you're talking, I'm like, I know exactly what I want to say. All right. So yeah, I guess Colin, his thing is really, like there's our cell and okay, sorry. It's falling out of my head. Okay. Something that he said that kind of really stuck with me is we have this understanding of many different diseases now. We're building our understanding of many different diseases now that we may or may not develop, right? But one thing that's going to happen to all humans is age. We all are aging, and we're all going to age, and eventually we're all going to be affected by one or another or multiple aging associated diseases. So aging is the most fundamental part of being human, and it's actually one of the things that we understand the least at the molecular level. And that's kind of like I think when it really comes down to it, we're just understanding fundamentally at the molecular level what it is to age. And once you're learning once learning the fundamental mechanisms underlying aging, you are understanding the mechanisms behind heart disease and cancer and neurodegenerative disease and high blood pressure, because all of those, while there's different diseases that we don't necessarily always think about in the context of aging, they essentially are all age-associated diseases and diseases in which aging is a driving force, essentially. Aging drives the development of all of these diseases. So it's like when it really, really comes down to it, it's not what we think about every day, but we are essentially trying to understand the molecular basis for aging and what's going on in this very basic part of human biology that we all will experience and we all are experiencing.
So I suppose from what I was able to glean from the various different articles that Professor Fine and Dr. Campbell looked at was a lot of it centers around, like you say, I suppose from a point of aging, a lot of it looks at how the aged cells, and admittedly I'm not a biochemist, so this is a bit out of my wheelhouse, but where the cell, because of the state of the cells, are in a state of disrepair potentially. It's working out what medicines and treatments can potentially help to aid in the repair process to either stave off aging, or can actually help with some of the resistances within cancer therapies and so on, and where we can get the body to recognize that as a problem within itself, rather than allowing the cancer to perpetuate and so on. But that is a bit of my interpretation as a non-biochemist.
No, that's absolutely a huge part of it, because you can think about it in the context of aging, and that, but I mean, it is more than that. It's not more than that. I mean, it's everything all at once. But definitely in terms of like drug resistance, so like a huge part of DNA repair research, if you ask I think another level of talking about DNA repair research and why do we do this is, like you said, we live and we age, and we develop DNA damage that accumulates, and we develop DNA damage, and our body repairs the DNA damage, but there is DNA damage that is not repaired, and that accumulates over time, and that can lead to the development of cancer. But then we come in and treat cancer with DNA damaging drugs, which is weird to think about. But then what's even weirder than that is not weirder, but what's even more like interesting is that the cancer cells that don't respond to the DNA damaging drugs are the cells that are really good at repairing DNA damage. And so it's like the cancer developed because of DNA damage, but then the cancer, you can't cure it because they're repairing the DNA damage, which it's kind of like backwards if you sit and like simmer with it for a little bit. But it's just this idea that, these cells, DNA damaging drugs are actually they're the oldest and most effective class of cancer drugs to exist. But the problem is that when you have that resistance, when you have the cells that are not responding to the DNA damaging drugs, that's when it becomes very, very hard to treat. And that's when, mortality happens. And so it's really, really important to be able to understand what are the cellular mechanisms for repairing this DNA damage. But like what I was saying with aging this is one of the things that we understand least. It's fundamentally, again, at a molecular level, when they discovered these drugs, these weren't drugs upon discovery. They weren't drugs that were made by design. They just, I don't know if you know the story of the nitrogen mustards, but they were using nitrogen mustards in World War I and World War II as poison warfare, biological warfare, mustard gas, chemical warfare. And so essentially they were using these mustard gases, and people were dying, but then there's people that weren't dying from these mustard gases. And then they were looking into these people, and they found that these people tended to have I don't know the deep of it anymore. I don't want to say anything wrong. Essentially, they were able to make the connection between highly proliferative cells being more affected by these mustard gases. And someone had the thought, well, if we're looking at highly proliferative cells being affected by these gases, then maybe cancer will be, maybe we can treat cancer with these mustard gases. And that's when they started looking at treating cancer with these mustard gases. So, and then even when they found that to work, we don't fully understand why these drugs work. We just know that these cells divide a lot and they need DNA, but our cells need DNA too, and our cells divide also. But when you treat someone with these poisons, essentially, you're going to kill off the cancer cells first. They're for some reason more sensitive to these drugs than our healthy cells are. So like this all started out with a bunch of hand waving, and you still can be hand wavy about it. I guess my point is we don't really understand it so deeply. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying about aging, is like it's such a fundamental part of our existence that we still don't understand so deeply at the molecular level. And same thing when it comes to treating cancer and understanding resistance. So like I said, we found out that these drugs work against cancer, and we started using them to treat cancer, and this became the most widely used class of cancer drugs. But there's still so much more to understand and to learn in order to improve these therapeutics, because we don't actually develop if you look at the number of cancer therapeutics that we have now compared to like 1960, we don't have that many more therapeutics now than we did then, or not, like we haven't grown in the way that you would expect, because it's pretty hard to defeat these things.
Because memory serves, that's where you have, which sounds a bit like it's definitely a backwards phrase, is more of a helpful poison in the respect that chemotherapy drugs are largely, it is a poison, but it's a poison that helps the body more than, in theory, helps more than hinders the body. But that's why people get sick from chemotherapy, because it is also killing or denaturing healthy cells as well. But I suppose this is more onto a more general point, just to really start coming to a close, is what would you say to the next generation of researchers as advice you wish you had before you started?
The success or failure of your science says nothing about you as, it's not reflective of you as an individual. Like, you really, really need to work really hard, and it's really hard to do when you spend so many hours and hours working on designing and doing and interpreting these experiments. You kind of like internalize the success or failure of these experiments, and you shouldn't be doing it either way. You shouldn't be, the failure is not reflective of you as a scientist, but neither is the success. And so most science doesn't, I mean, most of science is failure, right? Most of science is failing and trying again. And I don't think you know the toll that takes on you until you start doing it and feeling that toll. And so I just wish I had prepared myself mentally for that. Because I mean, not just me, I think we all go into our PhD programs thinking I'm academically strong, I've always done good, or I generally do good in my coursework, I'm good at studying, I'm good at learning, so of course I can do this. But it's not, once you dive into research world, it's not being about academically strong. That's not necessarily what's going to help you succeed. What's going to help you succeed is being able to withstand failure, and, keep your confidence and self-image high, and be able to push through this learning process all the way to the end. So you really want to have not the academic toolkit. We're all going to probably have the academic toolkit going in, but you want to have that psychological toolkit as well going in, because you can't make it. I don't think you can. It's going to be very hard to make it to the end without both of those. But it's definitely, you need the psychological toolkit as well.
Like you say that, I think we're taught for so many years that it's all attainment, the grade, that when we get to the point where, like you say, I think PhD is probably the first point you actually hit it in terms of your educational experience, or that's my experience of it, where it's more who you are, your understanding, your reflections, an exercise in humility rather than in how bright you are. Because in theory, everyone who's at the similar attainment level, because very, very few people actually go through their life and attain a PhD, and fewer still go beyond that. But like you say, I think we do get bogged down very easily in focusing on our academic achievements, and it's a personal. And I think that's probably the most difficult. By what I was hearing from yourself, is probably where you'd agree. You've got to stop viewing it as a personal affront to yourself, and more of the separation from your work, which is easy to say, very difficult to do. And I know going in, like you say, it's probably a harder experience than most people think to actually. And I suppose the next point, and I will edit that out, is would you say then is, if you were to be to ask a next interviewee a question about, so next content educator, what question would you give them about their research and about their impact? What would you like to know, even though you don't know who that guest may potentially be? What question would you ask?
I think, who is your audience? Because that's something that I struggle with, because I don't know my audience, because I was telling you earlier, I make the videos, but it's not like I'm getting enough feedback to actually know if I'm hitting home. So I don't, and then with that comes like maybe switching of my audience, as like this video didn't do well, maybe if I try and cater towards these people or direct it towards these people. And so I think that's something that is not helping me. And so I think someone that does know very well who their audience is.
So more of a question around how do you define your audience type? Okay.
Yeah.
No, that's an excellent place to end, I think. So thank you very much, Maram, for joining me. And
of course, thank you. Very enjoyable conversation.